Tonight, 4 of Canada's largest school boards now suing social media companies for billions.
We cannot wait any longer.
Why they say the apps are disrupting students' education and even rewiring their brains.
They are pretty addictive. I really couldn't say that they're not.
The carbon tax fight now down to the wire.
This isn't just reckless, it's immoral and it's inhumane.
Conservative premiers specifically are misleading Canadians.
At issue on the politics fueling this bitter fight. And the Canadian star towering over U.S. college basketball.
It's been everything I could have asked for.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Adrienne is on assignment. 4 big Ontario school boards are taking a group of tech giants to court, saying they need to pay up for the consequences of students' social media use in classrooms. They allege the makers of TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram knowingly created addictive products and marketed them to kids, altering their brain development and disrupting the learning environment. Deanna Sumanek-Johnson starts us off with why the boards say they had to act and how some of those tech companies are responding tonight.
Together, they teach and care for more than 500,000 students. Now, 4 of Canada's biggest school boards are going after the social media giants, each launching its own lawsuit against Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook to the tune of $4.5 billion. Among their allegations, that these companies have knowingly and or negligently disrupted and fundamentally changed the school learning and teaching climate by creating and sustaining prolific and or compulsive use of their products by students. They say it's rewired the way children think.
I'm talking about things like emotional dysregulation, lack of attention, inability to concentrate, but also things like aggressive behaviors rising very dramatically and quickly.
Hundreds of similar legal proceedings have been launched by the school boards in the U.S., and Florida just moved to ban social media for kids under 14.
Not all of these things will stick, but I think what's happening is governments, parents, school boards are trying lots of different things to make the student experience as they grow up better. Right? So they're less distracted, they're more focused, and they're able to learn and participate in the world the way we want to.
In a statement to CBC News, Snapchat says its app is different than others, focused on helping users communicate with their close friends, and has no traditional public likes or comments. TikTok highlighted its safeguards such as parental controls and an automatic 60-minute screen time limit for users under 18. But this parent isn't necessarily buying it.
If they're not going to make voluntary changes, then maybe doing it through the courts is the most effective way. I think the evidence is showing that there's clear relationships to anxiety, depression, with outcomes like self-harm and loneliness.
Deanna, what's the sense of how likely they are to win these lawsuits?
Erica, some of the experts say school boards are probably not too likely to get those $4.5 billion, certainly not anytime soon. Tussles with social media companies have proven tricky even for the federal government. And some of the lawsuits launched by the U.S. school boards are almost 1 year old with no resolution in sight. That said, experts also say that launching this lawsuit is a powerful statement to everyone, from social media companies, politicians, parents. It says we know what's going on and we know who's responsible for it.
Thanks for this. Deanna Sumanek-Johnson reporting in Toronto. As you heard from Deanna, the lawsuits refer to social media apps affecting young brains. Thomas Dagla looks at what research shows and what parents can do.
With social media giants keeping their detailed algorithms secret, there's no way to fully gauge why platforms deliver certain content to certain users. But teens know full well, somehow, those apps keep them hooked.
They are pretty addictive. I really couldn't say that they're not.
Yes, very. Super.
Yeah.
It's super addictive.
And it's no trivial habit. Study after study has examined the impact of social media on behavior, with Ontario's Western University even using brain imaging to research how all that screen time is shaping kids' minds.
These neurochemical changes are the same as what we see in addiction. They don't really have the necessary brain machinery to be able to manage constant rewards.
In other words, seeing those comments and seeking more likes can prove dangerous for teens, with more scrolling linked to aggression, depression, and anxiety. In Washington recently, as big tech bosses were grilled about harms to young users, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg rose to apologize to parents, but he insists.
Overall, teens tell us that this is a positive part of their lives.
As 4 Ontario school boards sue social media giants for billions, parents are being prompted to talk to their kids.
If we're aware that, when I watch this kind of content, I don't feel great about myself, we can intervene. You can change the algorithm. You can start searching out other content that's making you feel good.
Trouble is, users can only do so much.
The burden ultimately rests on technology companies, and we need laws and policies that are going to do that.
There's a lot riding on what users see on those apps, with the social media industry said to be worth more than $150 billion. Ontario school boards are demanding a bit of that money to mitigate harms. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
The man once known as the Crypto King has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. Sam Bankman-Fried, the founder and CEO of FTX, was convicted for stealing billions of dollars from investors in his now bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange company. In addition to the sentence, he's been ordered to forfeit more than $11 billion in assets. The 32-year-old's lawyers have already said they plan to appeal. To Baltimore, where the focus has shifted to clearing the wreckage left behind after that devastating bridge collapse. Katie Simpson now with the immense scale of the project and the continued tribute to the victims.
There is just so much for investigators to sort through, collecting what evidence they can on board the Dolly container ship as they try to pinpoint what went wrong. While Army Corps engineers used sonar equipment to survey what's left of the Francis Scott Key Bridge as they develop a plan to get Baltimore Harbor reopened.
Step 1 of that is we're going to clear the debris from the channel. Step 2 is we're going to remove the vessel. And step 3 is remove the rest of the bridge debris from the waterway. And we got the cranes on their way to help us do that.
Engineers will have to cut pieces of debris to make them small enough to be removed by those cranes, a task so enormous, officials are pleading for patience.
We have a very long road ahead of us. We understand that, and we're preparing.
Newly released traffic camera video shows the ship approaching the bridge. It's highlighted on the right side of your screen. The bridge is nearly empty, except for those flashing lights. Those are construction vehicles. Workers were in vehicles on a break at the time of the crash, according to NBC News, which spoke with the wife of a survivor. There would have been more vehicles if 3 Transportation Authority police officers had not acted quickly to stop traffic after the ship's Mayday call. Those officers were honored at the Baltimore Orioles home opener, along with the 6 victims of this horrific incident.
Let us join together in a moment of silence.
And as the crowd stood for the Star-Spangled Banner, it seemed to feel a little different. After all, the Francis Scott Key Bridge was named after the man who wrote the national anthem. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Authorities in South Africa say 45 people are dead after a bus careened off a bridge. Local officials say the driver lost control, collided with a barrier, then plunged into the gorge below. The bus was transporting Easter pilgrims from Botswana. An 8-year-old girl, the only known survivor, is receiving treatment for her injuries. A follow-up now to a story we brought you earlier this month from Gaza of a boy orphaned by an airstrike. Chris Brown tracked down 9-year-old Yahya again to find him out of harm's way. But the desperation of Gaza's children grows by the day. And a warning, it's disturbing to see.
We first met Yahya last month at the worst moment in his young life. His parents, sister, and 2 brothers were killed when an Israeli attack flattened the Gaza home they'd been staying in, leaving his bones crushed. But despite immense loss, the 9-year-old is also fortunate. He's been allowed to leave. I'm happy to be going abroad to get treatment, he told a videographer working for CBC News. I want to see my uncle in Canada. For perspective, there are more than 600,000 children crowded into southern Gaza, says UNICEF, and 40% of hospital patients are children. Of all of those badly injured, Dr. Jabbar al-Shir says Israel only approves 1 or 2 transfers out of Gaza to Egypt a day. The number of serious injuries is very high, in the thousands, he says, and the transfers are too few. Canada has a family reunification program for people who manage to get to Egypt, and Yahya would be eligible. But his uncle in Montreal says the costs of the boy's medical bills make him apprehensive to apply. The Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey cover the costs of medical bills of people coming from Gaza, said Mahar Hamad, but Canada does not. The boy has another uncle in Turkey, so that might be the family's first choice. Canada's reunification program still appears to be waiting for its first success. In a statement, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada said 986 people have applied, 32 people have been approved, but so far it appears none have actually arrived. For children still in Gaza, the warnings from UN agencies cannot be more dire about starvation in the north and Israeli threats to launch a ground assault on crowded Rafah in the south. James Elder of UNICEF is in Rafah.
600,000 girls and boys, a military offensive here. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a bloodbath.
As for Yahya, he'll stay in an Egyptian hospital for now. His uncle told us he's relieved his nephew is out of the war and his family is committed to helping him restart his life. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
In Saskatchewan, the RCMP now says 4 people who were found on a farm earlier this week died as the result of a murder-suicide. Police say that a man, a woman, and their 30-year-old son were killed at this farm in Newdorf, east of Regina. A 4th man in his 30s, also found at the scene, was dead from self-inflicted injuries. They were discovered on Sunday. Premiers again attacked the coming increase in the federal carbon tax at a parliamentary committee in Ottawa. The tax bumps up on April 1st, and time is running out. But as Ashley Burke shows us, the Liberals aren't backing down.
It's a beautiful Axe the Tax t-shirt.
Conservatives coming together to fight the carbon tax. Alberta's premier joining Pierre Poilievre's rally in Edmonton, just days before the federal tax is set to go up, then taking her message to MPs.
This isn't just reckless, it's immoral and it's inhumane.
Danielle Smith was among 3 Conservative premiers speaking out at a parliamentary committee this week.
This cost is not helping. It isn't driving innovation.
The Liberals allege the Conservative chair hijacked the committee so premiers could rail against the carbon tax as a political stunt.
Is it the case that you're more interested in playing politics than actually looking after the affordability of New Brunswickers and tackling climate change?
On the contrary, I think the playing politics I've witnessed here.
7 premiers oppose Monday's hike to the price of fossil fuel. Consumers can expect to pay about 3 cents more for a liter of gas. Quarterly rebates sent to households are also rising to help offset the costs.
There's other ways of reducing emissions other than digging into people's pockets and punishing companies.
Do you think you're losing the communications battle here?
Conservative premiers specifically are misleading Canadians. The Conservative opposition in Ottawa and Pierre Poilievre are not telling the truth to Canadians.
Trudeau and his ministers say Conservatives are failing to tell the public about those rebates.
The only folks who actually end up paying more than they receive in the benefit are people who live in a 6,000 square foot home, who have a Hummer in their driveway and a boat in their backyard. And you know what? They should pay more. They are polluting far more.
The Prime Minister sent a letter calling on these premiers to come up with a credible alternative plan to reduce emissions, but there's no sign the tax hike is going anywhere. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
For the second straight day, the Prime Minister rolled out another promise in the upcoming federal budget. It will include more funding for $10 a day childcare spaces.
This $1 billion in investment in childcare is going to make a huge difference in the number of spaces right across the country.
Demand for childcare spaces has surged since the federally subsidized program began, leading to longer waiting lists for spaces. Trudeau said the new money will help fund low-cost loans and grants to childcare providers so they can expand. Yesterday, the Liberals promised new measures to help renters. In just a few minutes, At Issue is going to pick up on this. Are these announcements simply a preview of the budget or a hint at the campaign to come? That's ahead. An Indigenous women's rights group is accused of betraying its nonprofit mission. Tonight, in a CBC News investigation, we can show you how the group is laying off staff, even as it looks to invest in businesses. Olivia Stefanovic now with the exclusive details.
The Native Women's Association of Canada is meant to promote well-being, but it delivered this painful message last month.
This type of announcement is difficult.
It was a shocking thing. In a video obtained by CBC News, approximately 50 employees find out they're losing their jobs.
We need to take action to ensure the financial health long-term of our organization.
Over 24 more layoffs followed, roughly half its workforce. The lobbyist group blames the federal government for not providing adequate, stable funding, while staff in a labor complaint allege they were targeted for organizing a union, something NWAC denies.
If those allegations are true, if those are the facts, then it sounds like a classic case of union busting.
Mi'kmaq lawyer Pam Pomander says she's also concerned NWAC is a nonprofit, and now it's shifting to bring in revenue, launching a cafe, artisan store, and spending millions of dollars on properties, lodges in Quebec and New Brunswick for healing retreats, and plans for a boutique hotel.
NWAC is not a business, it's not a government, and it's certainly not a grassroots community. It's a national advocacy organization, and it's supposed to be advocating on our behalf.
NWAC says it's expanding business activities to become less reliant on government funding.
It's honestly a slap in the face that there's going to be a luxury hotel that the NWAC is setting up.
Insiders, whose identities CBC News agreed to protect because they fear reprisal, say money is going to the wrong places.
The Government of Canada needs to look deeper into the Native Women's Association of Canada.
One person who couldn't stand it anymore is Crystal Semaganis. She's still distraught.
These resources are being spent on something elite that people like me will never use.
She says she quit after feeling like her work wasn't valued.
I would rather be poor than work where I'm treated like I don't matter.
So, Olivia, how has the group responded?
Well, they very much reject the accusation that they've wandered from their purpose, saying they're doing everything they can to keep afloat with no stable government funding. The hundreds of documents we obtained suggest a steep path ahead.
Thanks for that. Olivia Stefanovic reporting in Ottawa. The biggest college basketball tournament in the U.S. is getting closer to crowning a champion, and all eyes are on a Canadian superstar.
Singleton to the hoop, Edie with the rejection.
The incredibly tall phenom towering over the competition. An experimental therapy gives hope to patients with severe infections.
I had no other choice. It was do or die.
And some bears get ready for cottage season early.
It was the younger ones that showed the most interest.
We're back in 2.
Deep center. He certainly got enough of this one, didn't he?
That's Toronto Blue Jays slugger Vladimir Guerrero Jr. blasting a home run to put the team up 3-1 in their season opener. And the Jays didn't stop there, putting up 8 runs en route to beating the Tampa Bay Rays. The team will remain on the road until April 8th when they'll head back to the Rogers Centre for their home opener. The Sweet 16 is now underway in March Madness, with the U.S.'s top college basketball teams edging closer to winning a national championship. But as Jamie Strachan shows us, it's a Canadian player who's stealing the show.
For Zach Edey, the journey to becoming one of the most dominant college basketball players ever has been uncommon, to say the least.
Like understanding of the game and everything, and to now where the point I'm at now, it's been everything I could have asked for.
As a teenager, Edey was more of a baseball guy until he grew and grew and grew. He transferred to high school in Florida before coming to Purdue, where he didn't play that much his first 2 years.
I mean, I don't know if college basketball's seen a guy like that.
Edey comes back in.
Then he exploded. In 2023, he was National Player of the Year, an award he is set to win again this year. He will leave Purdue as the school's all-time leading scorer.
If they win a national championship, he'll go down as a legend. You know, I think that's kind of the next milestone.
During this year's NCAA March Madness tournament, the 7'4" center has been a force, leading his team to the Sweet 16, where they'll be favorites against Gonzaga.
I've been doing this a long time, and you just have never dealt with something like Zach.
The journey for Zach Edey here to Little Caesars Arena has been really an unprecedented one that's been helped with the support of friends and family.
I'm stunned every time he gets on the court.
Edey's mother, Julia, moved to Purdue to be close to her son.
It is one of those things you just don't want to miss a minute as a parent. You really can't, because you can't take anything for granted.
It's been great for me to kind of just have someone in the stands who I know and who I recognize. And Purdue is like a family to me, but my real family is like, it's my mom, my dad, and my brother.
On Edey's forearm, a tattoo of the postal code from the Toronto neighborhood he grew up in, a reminder of home and how far he has come. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Detroit.
A New Brunswick fisherman is also in the spotlight tonight after he almost missed claiming the largest lottery win ever in Atlantic Canada, $64 million.
I cannot be more pleased to share it with you. Congratulations.
A year after the draw, the ticket was due to expire next month. Turns out it had just been sitting unchecked on the winner's dresser this whole time. After the break, Rosie is here with At Issue.
Hey, Erica. Tonight we're going to talk about a new Liberal strategy to try and maximize attention on the coming budget.
What this upcoming budget is going to be all about. In one word, fairness.
So what measures are they rolling out and who are they trying to appeal to? Chantal, Andrew, and Aaron Wary join me to talk about that and more.
An experimental therapy developed in Winnipeg has kept an Ontario woman from losing part of her leg due to a chronic infection. The treatment is only available in clinical trials. Karen Pauls shows us why there's hope this case will change that.
Are you ready for your next dose?
Dr. Marisa Azad gives 79-year-old Tia Turcott a dose of the phage therapy designed to attack the bacterial infection that resulted from hip replacement surgery.
This is probably one of the worst periprosthetic joint infections I'd encountered in my career.
The infection had become resistant to most antibiotics, and Turcott had developed a severe toxicity to the only one that still worked. Doctors were recommending amputation.
I was extremely limited in what we can do to treat her, and really, this was the end of the line.
So she suggested phage therapy. Phages are viruses that only infect bacteria, injecting their genetic information inside, creating more of themselves until they burst out, looking for more bacteria to kill.
So this was my last resort. I had no other choice. It was do or die.
Health Canada authorized a rare single-patient clinical trial.
This is the bacterial colonies.
Samples of the bacteria infecting Turcotte were sent to Stephen Theriault. He and his team used that to create a phage specifically for Turcotte.
What we do is ensure that our bacteriophage that we do use is killing the patient's bacteria at a very high level, so 100% or 98%, making sure that we get rid of that bacterial infection.
Turcotte's body is responding well.
I'm just so happy to be here. I have a lot to live for.
Azad says she's already planning for another clinical trial.
A lot of the patients that I see with these infections, they have severe depression. Some patients have amputations, chronic pain. It's a terrible quality of life. And for me to be able to say, you know what, there's hope, that's worth more than anything. You did it, all done.
All finished.
For Tia Turcotte and her family, it's worth everything. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Now let's break down the week in politics. Rosie is here with At Issue.
At issue this week, a very early pre-budget charm offensive. The Prime Minister already revealing what's coming next month.
What this upcoming budget is going to be all about. In one word, fairness. Why? Because for Canada to succeed, we need everyone to succeed. When you look out at the economy these days, it just doesn't feel very fair.
So what to make of the new strategy? Who are the Liberals trying to target? I'm Rosemary Barton. I'm here to break it down on At Issue tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and sitting in for Althea is Erin Wary. Good to see everybody. Chantal, I'll start with you. What do you make of this? Let's start with the strategy, the idea that over the next couple of weeks, we're going to hear more about what's in the budget, perhaps than we are used to.
At least it's transparent. Usually the way this is done is you leak some choice items that you really like to selected media and hope it goes from there. So there's no secret in the way that they're doing it. Mostly because they believe that on the day after the budget, we'll be asking or answering the question, will the government survive? It needs the support of at least one party. And how big is the deficit and what does it mean going forward? So they are hoping that by parceling out tidbits of the budget, they're going to get coverage for those parts and a focus on them. I think the downside to that is yes, but with that comes scrutiny. And I'm not sure that the announcement on rentals, for instance, went down exactly the way they wanted to. It allows people to look and kick the tires of their announcement a lot. And sometimes when you kick tires, you realize that they're flat tires.
But at least people are talking about it, right, Andrew? I mean, even if it's over the course of 2 weeks, it's maybe being talked about in a more substantive way than it would be on budget day when we're trying to cram everything in and then go back and look at things.
It's a trade-off. You know, the budgets are basically exercises in media manipulation and mind control. You know,
to put it lightly.
Traditionally, you locked a bunch of ravenous journalists in a room for several hours and deprived them of any outside contact with the world, and all in the name of quote-unquote budget secrecy. And people were prosecuted for revealing the contents, no matter how trivial, of budgets in the past. Now, and for several budgets, going back many years now, that convention has been basically eroded, as Chantal said, if not broken altogether. Usually, as she said, by a series of strategic leaks, which have their own benefits and drawbacks in terms of media manipulation, that we run after any kind of leak or scoop obediently, and they get their coverage that way. In this case, they're using the Prime Minister's podium to not just leak it, but proclaim it. But I'm not sure how much of this is really new. Fairness, quote unquote, has been the doctrine of every budget that this government has produced, to the exclusion, until very recently, of any even mention of growth. Lately, they've been talking about it, but not with any actual serious policies to propose, but at least have become aware that we have a growth problem overriding how it's divided between the different components of society. But I'm not sure it's anything that new in the message the Prime Minister's putting out.
Well, I did say this to Aaron in the newsroom today, but some of the language seemed very similar to me to what Pierre Poilievre is saying. Young people are struggling, they can't get into the housing market, it's not okay for this to be happening. And I wondered whether this idea of fairness is the government recognizing something that their opponents have already recognized, Aaron.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of catch up here. You know, if Pierre Poilievre is talking about the same things, it's because there is real angst, there's real concern amongst people, there's real frustration with the way things are working, particularly when it comes to housing. And the Liberals responding to that is, you know, then makes a certain amount of sense. It would have made even more sense 6 months or 12 months ago. I think, you know, the larger communication strategy, I think it's important to remember that the way budgets get covered is, you know, in addition to what Andrew says about the manipulation of budget lockups, there's a weird practice of sort of everyone paying attention to a budget for the first day or so, or 2 days, and then quickly dropping it and sort of dismissing subsequent attempts to highlight it by the government. And I think to a certain extent it's surprising that a government has taken this long to figure out that what if we just announce it beforehand, maybe people will actually pay attention. As Chantal says, it still depends on whether those policies actually make sense. But I think to a large extent this is the government just trying to get into the game more and actually have a real fight with Pierre Poilievre, which you know, has really been lacking, I suppose, over the last year.
Chantal?
Yes, but in the process they've managed to pick another fight with most premiers in the sense that if you're the government, not the opposition party, and you are serious about the way federalism works, and you're serious about housing and rental policy, the thing to do is probably to gather the people who are actually in charge of it, that would be the premiers, and try to eke out a consensus on the way forward. The way not to do it is to go and have a news conference and announce all of these things that you cannot possibly achieve without the provinces, without even testing the ideas on them or asking them why they didn't do, for instance, the rental registry. It may be a good idea. Many provinces have looked into it. The federal government has not. So what I think is the biggest fault with their strategy is it makes them look unserious as a federal government and a bit desperate.
Yeah, I mean, most of the things that were announced for the renters are either unworkable or provincial jurisdiction or both. I would only say this seems to be common to more than one party and party leader. The Poilievre's proposals also involve running roughshod over not just provincial but municipal jurisdiction. And what you find is when an issue is hot, political party leaders, whatever their ideological stripe or their view of federalism, all seem to agree that A, the government must fix it, and B, the federal government in particular must fix it. So they are all of them basically tossing the division of powers out the window at this point.
But if the goal is to try to address people who feel concerned about these issues, don't they have to try something? Like, don't they have to throw some kind of spaghetti at the wall here? Yeah, Chantal,
don't they have to try something that could actually be put in place and work?
Yeah.
Oh, if you're going to get technical.
Aaron.
Yeah, I suppose the first casualty of political warfare in Canada is jurisdictional recognition. Look, I think there's a bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Justin Trudeau got in trouble for saying that housing wasn't primarily federal jurisdiction. Yes. And so to a certain extent, I guess if the Liberals learned a lesson from that, it's to ignore whether or not it's your jurisdiction. I do, you know, maybe it's just the nostalgia that we've been gripped in over the last few weeks. I do kind of wonder whether some First Ministers' conferences would actually come in handy to actually sit down and discuss these things. But I think on the raw politics of it, I just don't know whether there's much of a downside to coming out and saying we're going to do all these things and then sort of hoping and demanding that the provinces get in line with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're going to talk about another subject where you could wonder whether a First Minister's meeting would be of any help at all, but we're going to leave this topic there. And when we come back, we will talk more about this Conservative premiers, this time lining up at committees to denounce the carbon tax.
Conservative premiers across this country are misleading Canadians.
As the Prime Minister calls them out, he also says he's open to other ideas. That's next. Several premiers appeared before committees this week to criticize the incoming carbon tax hike.
We all don't like the carbon tax.
This isn't just reckless, it's immoral and it's inhumane.
The Prime Minister says he's open to alternatives.
Any province that wants to put forward a similarly robust way to fight climate change, but do it in a way that works for them, is more than welcome to.
So how will the premiers respond to the Prime Minister's challenge there? And are the premiers, is their strategy working with Canadians? Here to break it all down again, Chantal, Andrew, and Aaron. Andrew, let's start with you. You know, those three premiers that we showed there, they have things in common. They're all conservative, and two of them are headed to the polls, I believe, in the fall. And I recognize this is the third week we've talked about this now, but it is still happening, and the Prime Minister was forced to, in some way, respond. I don't know what you thought about the response, but give me your take.
Well, you know, the Liberal members of the committee put up a big fuss about why are you inviting these Conservative premiers to come and appear before us. I actually think it probably did the Liberals more good than harm by a country mile, because what you saw on display there with each of them was just an absolute parade of nonsense. You saw how completely dishonest they were about the costs of the carbon tax, and whether basically just once again ignoring the rebates that are available that for 80% of households, as the parliamentary budget officer has found makes them more than whole. But also when they were asked for their alternatives, it was just fantasy. It was well, maybe we could amend the Paris Accord. Or maybe we could get China to reduce its consumption of coal, or maybe we could get other countries to accept our, to give us the credit for the carbon reductions they made by using our liquid natural gas rather than claiming the credit themselves. Well, you know, why would they do that exactly? Was not answered. Or my favorite, you know, the topping it all was Scott Moe the day before, who was when he was asked alternatives, said, well, we looked at all the alternatives and they all cost more than the carbon price. Gosh, I wonder what we should conclude from that.
Yes.
So I think, you know, the Prime Minister was right to challenge the premiers to present alternatives, and when they were asked to do so, I think we saw how bankrupt their positions were.
Chantal.
I have a bit of a problem also with the Premier of Alberta saying that the increase in the carbon tax is immoral and inhumane, when in her budget just a few days ago, she raised the tax on gas in her province. So is it because it's federal that it's inhumane and immoral? Or is it because people are struggling with cost of living issues? I too believe that they should have rolled out, the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc should have rolled out the red carpet for these premiers.
Aaron.
For as long as we have been talking about carbon taxes in this country, the debate has basically been had between carbon taxes and some unnamed, unspecified alternative that has no costs and will inconvenience no one. And that's not a real debate. And that is, I think, you know, to Andrew's point, a lot of what we saw this week is a reminder that we're not having a serious debate about climate policy. We're having a complaint session about the carbon tax without any competing proposals. Not to pine for the days of First Ministers' conferences, but I do wonder what would happen if the Prime Minister invited every Premier to come to Ottawa with a fully costed and independently analyzed plan for how their province was going to reduce emissions by as much as the national target. What would they come to Ottawa with? What would the alternatives be exactly? Let's have, by all means, there's a huge debate to be had about carbon taxes, about how the current policy is designed, about what the best way forward is for the country. But that's not really the debate we're having right now.
There's a version of this going on amongst the pro-carbon tax right, I should say as well, which is people pointing out, rightly up to a point, that this is a very flawed version of the carbon tax. And I'd make this point, that ideally you'd want the carbon tax to be replacing existing policies rather than simply layered on top, and you'd want, very few exceptions and all these kinds of things. So yeah, make that point, but when people go to the point of saying, well, therefore we should just scrap the carbon tax because it's so flawed, well, again, what's your available alternative? The alternative is, if you scrap the carbon tax, the alternative is not going to be a better carbon tax. It's going to be dumber, stupider, costlier policies, of which we have far too many already.
But it does rally people. I mean, every time Pierre Poilievre is out, and this is the bumper sticker, slogan, and it does get people worked up. Whether it's based in the reality of what's actually happening and facts is a different issue. But Chantal.
But I think the parties, including the Liberals who want to make the case for the carbon tax in the next election, are slowly but surely getting a bit of a break in the sense that the choice, and yes, I see the polls and I see people at rallies, but to be transparent about the choices on offer, one is saying we have a policy, it's not perfect, there's a carbon tax, you like to hate it. And the other side is basically saying we should probably do nothing about climate change. Because that is what we heard under all the words from the Premier this week is let's not do anything and let's let the rest of the world worry about it. We don't need to. So voters can make a choice based on that, but that is the choice. It's not a choice between a great policy that will do no harm to anything and the carbon tax. As for the fact that you say people are rallying to this, I covered the GST debate. For years, Brian Mulroney said, we're replacing a tax with a tax, which he was. And no one was hearing it because people were sick of Brian Mulroney.
Yeah. So when Danielle Smith says things like this is starting to become a national an issue of national unity, Aaron, and when they try and set up that this is breaking up the country in terms of the position, like how concerned do the Liberals have to be that the consensus around not a carbon tax but fighting climate change is splintering?
Yeah, they have to be concerned, not only for their own electoral fortunes next year, but for the entire idea of climate policy. Although I would note that every time someone says, a premier or someone else says, well, I oppose the carbon tax, they also say, oh, but I also know we need to fight climate change. Sure. It's just that no one is kind of making those two things go together and explaining exactly what you would do otherwise. The politics of this were always going to be difficult, because similar to the GST, the price of a carbon tax is explicit and right in front of your face. Mm-hmm. And, I think the Liberals thought or may have been sort of lulled into thinking that they had kind of won that fight with the rebate, that they had convinced people that this was over. And now there's a period of inflation, and also similar to Mulroney, people are kind of tired of the Liberal government. Yeah. That's the politics of it. But again, to come back to the policy, if you're not going to use a carbon tax to reduce Canada's emissions, to get to a 2030 target, to get to net zero, what's the alternative? And that's the piece that continues to be missing from this debate.
Chantal quickly, then Andrew quickly. Yeah.
I think the Liberals really believed that they finally crossed that bridge when Aaron O'Toole tried to drag his party inside the carbon pricing tent. Now, we know that one of the first things that Pierre Poilievre did was exit that tent, and at that point, the debate over who has the best solution, accepting carbon pricing as part of the mix, ended, and here we are.
Andrew, last word.
Unfortunately, I think that the position of I think something should be done about carbon emissions and climate change, but I'm not proposing any policies to do that. I think that more or less expresses where a large section of the public is right now.
Okay, you guys, thank you. See, third week, you guys still had things to say, and it helped that I brought Aaron, who hadn't said them yet on TV. Thank you all very much. Have a good long weekend if you get it. And with that, I'll send things back to Erica Johnson, and she's in Vancouver.
Thank you, Rosie. Next, a group of bears decide to try out a new mode of transportation.
It's something new to explore is very much in their natural instinct.
The mischievous bunch in our moment. That's not a sight you see often. Black bears just taking a pause in their day-to-day to take a ride on a swan pedal boat. They live at a safari park in England, and when a mini lake formed after some heavy rain, zookeepers decided to give them this new toy. How the bears embraced it is our moment.
We got the swan boat. It was something that we added about a week and a half ago, and making the most of all the wet weather that we've had. It was the younger ones that showed the most interest. They are Harvard and Colorado. And then we also have Maple and Aspen, the females, they're sisters. Maple is the smallest of all our bears, but she is by far one of the most confident. She was the first to play with him. Then they all climbed in, and we put monkey nuts on there, bits of honey, just things to give them a bit of interest in it. Having something new to explore is very much in their natural instinct. The youngsters are really playful, so they're constantly playing, just rolling around, chasing each other up cheek, chasing each other into the pond, splashing each other. They are extremely playful as a species. It was nice to see them interacting with something totally different. The boat did move. They were a bit apprehensive to begin with, so then they sort of run off in a playful panic, but then as soon as they run off, they want to come back and see if there's any more food in it. So they're just great characters.
And if you're wondering, do they ever fall in? Well, no. Bears have very good balance. They can scale trees of up to 30 meters in height. I think the big question is, when the weather warms up, are they going to give up their newfound toys? I can barely imagine the chaos. Thank you for joining us tonight. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson. Take care.